Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Thank Your Pain podcast, where we are finding the lessons and blessings from the painful moments in our lives. And today we are so blessed to have Mr. Trevor Hanson with us. He is a licensed associate MFT located in Utah, who specializes in helping couples create better relationships. His Instagram focuses on being a husband who practices what he preaches. And he's also built an entire course for couples to learn how to heal negative patterns that they go through, grow together, learn together, and have a loving relationship. So we are going to dive into so many things today: relationships, things like infidelity, how to love each other more, how to grow more. And Trevor, I just thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Absolutely. So one of the first questions that I wanted to ask you was, how did you just find the niche of couples? I mean, you could have chosen anything. What was the motivation for that?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I was actually asking myself that the other day. I'm like, it's funny. I'm known online for couples therapy. That is about, I would say, 50% of what I actually do with like my clients. Most of what I do is relational focused. Like there's some sort of relational element in everything. I do work with a lot of individuals as well, but through like grad school, you start learning about all these different like approaches to therapy, different models. You'll hear about like Gottman therapy or EFT or CBT and all these acronyms. And as we were learning about them, one in particular stood out to me that just kind of started to make sense. And I was like, oh, dang, this is kind of how I think. This is really cool. And it was emotionally focused therapy. And emotionally focused therapy, along with Gottman therapy approach, are kind of like the two leading approaches. If you are in the world of being a therapist, you're working with couples, you're probably going to be in one of those two camps most of the time, just because it has the most research behind it and they work really well according to the research and things. So I started to align with a model that happened to be couples focused. And then when I started doing therapy, I just found it kind of more fun, honestly. Like when you got two people in the room, like it's just exciting. Like there's something going on and there's always something to work with. So I think I like couples work. I think I don't know. I place a lot of value and importance on like strengthening like families. I believe like, the core and fundamental unit of society and our success is founded in the family. And if I can strengthen the executive branch of the family, like couples, then I'm probably doing something good. And I don't know. I like adrenaline and thrill seeking. And sometimes it's kind of fun when couples are in my office and they're maybe get it a little heated or like we're working through something really emotional. It gets me stoked. So that's my long answer to your first question.
That's awesome. I love how you talked about the different ways that, therapy can be approached with too, the different styles. And you chose one that you really resonated with, because that's what makes an effective therapist, right? Like the relationship of the therapist and the client is what helps any type of therapy work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you said was you really like to focus on keeping the family unit together. So I'm going to dive in with a hard-hitting question right away.
Yeah.
What is your opinion then on couples who want to stay together just for the children?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. And it's not so much always like the focus is on keep the family together, but the family itself is the basic functioning unit of society. And we are basically grown up, influenced about our like character, our values, how we see love and belonging, our insecurities. A lot of that is formed within our early attachments, our experiences with our brothers and sisters, with our mom and dad, all of that. And so there are, oftentimes staying together and working it out and finding a harmonious, solution. That is awesome. If we can go there, then yeah, for sure, let's go there. If couples are strictly together for the children and it is, highly dysfunctional and there is no hope of solution, at least in what they see, then yeah, I don't think that's going to be very beneficial. And a lot of people need to make their own choices. To say like, I'm over here on my high and mighty throne and being like, everyone should stay together. Like that doesn't work. Like a lot of times people do need to separate. People do need to go opposite ways. I think there's a much more hope of staying together than we believe there is in our society, and a lot more than we emphasize. But yeah, I guess that's my opinion there. I think there's times when, yeah, divorce and separation does need to happen.
And so when couples come to your office, is there like a recurring pattern or theme that you see that they're struggling with? And can you maybe explain those general issues?
Yeah. So recurring patterns that you'll see underneath all of the context. So context is like, what do we fight about, or what's happening in life, like added stressors. Maybe we're newlyweds, maybe we've been together for a long time and we're feeling bored, or maybe we're got, children, or a particular child who has like a challenge, like a disability. Like all that is context, and it's really important information. But if you were to look at, despite context, what's consistent and what's in this pattern is, most people are going to come to me when there's conflict or disconnection in some kind of way. There's like some sort of fighting, we're not aligned. Sometimes there's like one-offs, like, okay, how do we, disclose for somebody who's maybe single and they're dating again, like how do we disclose our relationship to the kids in a way that's healthy? So that's different, but that's more rare. Most of the time I get a lot of conflict in my office, and conflict also tends to have similar patterns across most people generally as well.
Right. And so the couples that you see, is it always within monogamous relationships, or have you ever seen couples that are exploring something like non-monogamy or open relationships or polyamory? And how does that kind of interfere with normal therapy, methods?
Yeah. It's typically monogamous relationships. Really, where I'm at, that's definitely going to be true. I mean, generally in the United States, I think culturally that's pretty true, but specifically, like, it's much more of a conservative type mentality. In Utah, kind of, a lot of heterosexual couples in a lot of ways, honestly. And so I kind of get run of the mill, like male, female, like we're just working on stuff. I have had a couple of clients in that kind of polyamorous position, not as couples coming in, but as individuals who are maybe working on their relationships and things. And yeah, it does have the big influence. You think about this idea of, in emotionally focused therapy, we talk about this concept called a competing attachment. An attachment is, that bond or that person that you're linked to. And inherently, we have our primary attachment, which is our parents. And the way that goes is going to dictate a lot of how we see the world, how we trust, how we love others in the future, our insecurities and all that. And we can talk about that literally probably forever. But that is one attachment. Your marriage or your dating relationship or what have you is another attachment. And humans don't do very well with competing attachments. Polyamory is an intentional competing attachment. It's an intentional addition. And so I don't know enough to speak and say this is the research. My gut tells me it adds quite a few layers of challenges just from what I'm seeing, even competing attachments between, friends, I spend too much time riding my mountain bike and hanging out with my buddies, and my wife is missing me and wishing that I had more time for her or whatnot. That can be a competing attachment. So yeah, polyamory, I think it can get a little bit challenging just from the competing attachment standpoint.
Right. And I'm so glad that you brought up the competing attachment as far as it relates to friends as well, because that was another question I was going to ask. Is the competing attachment just between lovers, or can you have a competing attachment with even your children and your spouse, or your friends and your spouse? And how do you resolve those types of conflicts?
Yeah. Competing attachments can look of all sorts of kinds. However, ones that are most closely reflective of a love relationship or a romantic relationship, I guess all relationships are based in love, but a romantic and intimate type relationship, those are going to be the ones that are the most painful or challenging to work through. And that could be on a scale of a competing attachment could be hey, yeah, I'm looking at naked people on the internet for sexual pleasure. And that feels oh, that's weird. Sex is very bonding and healing and a close experience. And somehow a piece of that is going outside of the relationship. That sometimes can trigger feelings of betrayal and competing attachment, close friendships with people of the opposite sex. If, you're in a heterosexual relationship, given that context, that can definitely be more of an intense competing attachment. Or if the lines are starting to get blurred, it's this looks maybe like an emotional affair. The more it resembles your romantic relationship, the more it's going to be difficult. The more pain is going to be behind a lot of that competing attachment.
That is so interesting. I'm glad you brought up even looking at, pictures on the internet, because there's a lot of debate on if you get upset at something like that, maybe you're insecure or maybe you have trust issues. Can you kind of explain what is the line for things like that? Is it just depending on person to person, or does the competing attachment have like systems?
Yeah. I would say it really does depend on people and how they view that within the context of their relationship. If they're like, hey, yeah, pornography is fair game in our relationship. Then, some people, it doesn't seem to have as much of an impact. I will say from what I've seen, it seems like really consistently it does have an impact. It does bring up insecurities. Like most of the time you're going online, you're not going to be looking at like, average bodies for the most part, just like we like to post our best on social media. Goodness gracious, these outlets that post, sexually explicit content, most of the time it's going to be different than your partner. It's going to be like a little different in some way. And so it starts to create all these questions like, man, do they prefer me or do they prefer something else? And people might say, oh, well, you're just insecure. It's like, I don't know. I think that, sex in itself is so intimate, it's so bonding. And you even look from a neurochemical standpoint, there are very, very few times when your body actually receives a dump of oxytocin, which is that love hormone, right? And people think like, oh, if you cuddle with your dog, you're going to get it. No, you're really not going to get it there. You're going to get some serotonin. You're going to feel calm. But oxytocin is like this special chemical that dumps into your blood, like, for example, post-orgasm with your partner. It's very closely related to feelings of love, closeness, and attachment. And so if you're supplanting a similar mechanism outside of the context of the relationship, I mean, just from a biological standpoint, that feels a bit threatening.
So when people cross these lines, now I want to take a turn and go into more of what are the layers of betrayal? How many couples, or not how many, but when couples come in and there's been something like an affair, do you find that going to couples counseling helps these couples mend that relationship, or is having an affair something that is broken?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, because I think when we think about the concept of an affair, like in our own relationships, it feels like it's like on the list of, if that happened, we would be instantly done, right? Most people are like, if they tried to kill me or if they had an affair, like I'd be out of there. And mind you, when it actually happens though, when it's like a person that you care deeply for and you've been with and you so deeply long for them and you care about them, there's a bit more tolerance within the relationship than people assume. And in no way am I saying like, hey, there's tolerance, so go have affairs. Like, please, by all means, no. Like, fidelity and protecting that attachment is incredibly important to healthy relationships, and I think it's morally important. But there is hope for healing. There is hope for healing, and it does take some certain elements for that to happen. It's not to say like if you don't heal that you were unsuccessful and you didn't do it right. There's so much context behind what makes a treatment process in the regard, like if your idea of success is the relationship is mended and you stay together, there's a lot that goes into making that successful. There's certain elements that we could name and talk about, but it's case by case. Like each relationship is different. But yeah, to say like, oh, you have an affair and you're just completely hopeless and that's the rule, that is not the rule.
Perfect. I mean, I'm sure that gives hope to a lot of people. Obviously, like you said, we're not encouraging affairs, but I think a lot of people, because I read a statistic that almost like 75% of relationships experience infidelity or an affair of some sort. And that's a lot. And I don't know, I think I've heard that from Esther Perel. I don't know if you've studied her at all, but
yeah,
she's a psychotherapist of 30 years of studying affairs. And
right.
It was just very interesting to hear her perspective on that. But in your own experience, is there a general kind of step-by-step process that you take people through to start healing from these things?
Yeah.
How do they gain trust back in the relationship for the betrayed and, the betrayer?
Yeah. So there's a handful of elements that can happen kind of simultaneously, and based on where the relationship is, will give cues maybe to your therapist as to what needs to be emphasized more. But elements of healing an affair are a lot of it is first on the foremost, like the person who has stepped outside of the relationship has to be accountable. They got to be like 100% have to take ownership of what has happened. There will not be true and genuine healing without that. You could just like sweep it under the rug for 30 years or whatever, and there's people that do that. I don't know if that feels like success to me, but to actually heal within like, therapy context and start coming together, the person has to take accountability. And that is so important because if we go to that kind of the next piece, it links in. There's what we call the attachment injury. There's competing attachments where it's like, oh, that's competing with me. And then there's kind of attachment injuries. I want you to almost imagine like there's you, your partner, and your attachment. It's almost like a third person or I guess member within your relationship. And that has times where it's strengthened or it's damaged or hurt or broken in certain ways. And an affair is a very classic example of an attachment injury. It has been injured, it has been hurt, and it needs to be cared for, attended to, and healed, specifically from the standpoint of the injuring partner doing a lot of the caring and attending and healing, and the injured partner, it might take them some time to even be open to that idea because it says, I'm so afraid to let you in. I can't let you in. But goodness gracious, even that statement, that is more vulnerable than they probably have been. And a lot of the times, the things that lead to healing these attachment injuries is we go from the context of like, oh, you did this, you did that, we fight about this, we fight about that, down to those deeper emotional places. Like for a partner to turn to the other one in a real heartfelt way and say, goodness, like I want to trust you because I love you. Like I've been with you for so long, but I don't even dare. Like I don't dare go out on that branch. I don't dare be there with you. I'm afraid. And for the other person, instead of being shameful and be like, oh, you just think I'm a dirtbag because I had an affair and blah, blah, blah. If they sit there and go, oh, that makes so much sense. I'm so sorry I hurt you. I can't even imagine the pain that you're going through. Let me be here present with you. Whoa, that's different. That's where we start healing attachment injuries. You can almost feel it when I'm saying it. Like these are the kind of conversations that we help couples to have. So within therapy, we'll kind of ask questions to help bring out some of this deeper emotion. And then they'll tell me, and then I'll ask them, hey, why don't you tell that to your partner? Can you just turn to them? Can you just look at their eyes and tell them? Because I'm a cool guy, but you're not trying to create a relationship with me. You're trying to create it with him or her. And so they turn and they share. And then we process, like, what was that like? And we start to look at, whoa, okay, that little bit is healing, right? It's not like, boom, we went to therapy one time, we're healed. It's layers of healing, layers of emotionally safe, emotionally connecting conversations that help the injured partner to heal on that side of the attachment.
So powerful to create that connection together by just taking responsibility. Okay.
Yeah. And also, if we keep going kind of in this vein, we say for the injuring partner, what do they need to do? Well, they need to be willing to go down into that emotionally connecting place, because attachment, really closeness, attachment is rooted in things like sharing fear with one another, sharing vulnerabilities, sharing pain. Like a lot of times the statistics just tell us that men are more likely to step out of a relationship in infidelity. It's rare that I have a couple come in where it's been the other side. So I'm going to say male in my example. And males also tend to follow the way that they cope with distress in the relationship is to withdraw and stonewall. And females tend to pursue, criticize, and blame. And so we've both got two things that are really, really not helpful. It's not to say one is worse than the other, but if we're talking about men, and we're talking about a man who has stepped out in the relationship, most likely he has been withdrawing. He has been emotionally distant. He has been emotionally unavailable in some kind of way. And that emotionally unavailable part of him, there's probably some sort of pain and hurt that has led him to the affair. Not that his partner has done it. It could be insecurities from childhood. It could be anything. It's like, dang, like that feeling of that rush of like somebody being interested in me and I'm interested in them and it's kind of cool and that feels validating. Like, what are you trying to cover up there? That's a whole nother thing. But basically, he's been so emotionally distant. If he can start to be emotionally open, share fears, share longings, all of that, she starts to go, oh my gosh, like I actually get access to him, right? He's probably been lying. If there's an affair, he's most likely been lying about something. People don't love to talk about things like affairs too much, or he's been minimizing it, making it sound better than it was. And so she's had this history of going, goodness, you've been unfaithful. You've been lying to me. How can I trust you? Well, start building trust by just being emotionally open, by letting her actually have access to you. And some guys are like, oh, I don't want to be like, emotionally, like emotions are weakness. Like I can't show my emotions. Goodness gracious, man, your emotions are one of your greatest strengths. How in the world do you think you connect with anybody? It's through emotion. And so when she has access to you emotionally, she can start to trust you. It's not the silver bullet, but it's where we can start.
I love that. And I love that you brought up specifically men and the issues that they face, because obviously I'm a men's coach, and this is something that we talk about all the time, is that society says men should shove it all down, but we both know that it doesn't go away. It just manifests into different activities, or like you said, infidelity. And so if we take a look at that and reverse engineer, so they haven't had an affair yet, but they're, they keep everything inside. They locked it up. They're starting to feel rocky in their relationship. What are some steps like a man could take to become closer in his partnership if he's afraid to be vulnerable?
Yeah. Honestly, the first thing that just comes to my mind, and this is way too simplistic and we get to more nuanced stuff, but like, just do it. Like start asking yourself hard questions. Like, what do I need or long for in my relationship? Like, and I use the word long for because it is more emotional. It's like that stretching, like heart feeling, like, oh my gosh. Like, and it could be as simple as like, I just long to be close to my wife. My goodness, she would probably love to hear that. Or, my partner, whoever you're with, those deeper longings, or owning fears. Like, what am I actually afraid of in relationships? Are there things that have happened to me in the past that maybe make me afraid of being abandoned or not being good enough? Guys really don't like to admit that, but a lot of times we do feel that way, where it's like we want to perform, we want to show up, but I got this underlying fear of just like, I'm not good enough. And having the willingness to like just own those things, just say them out loud, put them out once, and you get over a lot of the fear of doing it again. And you think about it. Okay, so maybe your partner, like we're starting to talk kind of naturally about what I call the negative cycle, where one partner we'll take the classic example, maybe female pursuing, criticizing when things are difficult, in an argument, and the man is withdrawing. Both of them need to change their positions. Those don't work. Criticism and withdraw, they just don't work. They're going to be met with defensiveness and fear every single time. And so if a guy can start to change his position from one of withdrawn to just engaged, curious, open, and vulnerable, goodness, you've done like 90% of your work. Like that's huge. That is so big. And what happens for her? So when you withdraw, typically maybe her feelings start to go, oh my gosh, like he doesn't care about me. He doesn't love me. I'm afraid he's going to leave me. All the fear, all of the stuff underneath. And it comes out in her attempted solution is to be like, well, I got to latch onto you even harder. So I'm going to tell you how you're doing it wrong and how I need you to change so that I can feel safe. But if you engage, the message totally changes. It goes, oh my gosh, like he's here for me. He's available. He wants to be here. He actually cares about who I am. He cares about how I feel. I don't need to get critical and latch on and blame and all that. Like I've got him right here. He's more accessible. So I say, start changing your positions.
Wow, that is so powerful. But on another level, a lot of the men that I work with and coach, they don't know what their deepest longings are. They have no idea if they're afraid of commitment or abandonment. They literally don't know because they are unaware of how to connect with that part of themselves. So if we can get down to like the ABCs of like the most simplest way, how can a man start the journey of connecting with himself so he can start to understand what to even just do?
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't have to be like this crazy, like spiritual journey where you're like, flying through space I was just imagining that like little cat Pop-Tart with a rainbow behind him.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what came to my mind apparently. So you don't have to be on that guy flying through space, like finding these like deep answers in the stars. Honestly, just go back to like, why do I actually want to be in this relationship? I love you. That's pretty simple. Like I love her. I love being close to her. Sometimes I get a little bit afraid that like I'm not doing it right. That's not terribly deep. I'm afraid that I'm not getting it right. I really want to get it right for you. Why do you want to get it right for her? What's the meaning behind that? What's the purpose in getting it right? It's not just like, so you get a gold star and a thumbs up and things feel good, or It's because you want closeness. If you want connection. And most of the time, it's really not terribly deep. I mean, you can get a little deeper, but I say go to the attachment. Again, we keep talking about this attachment and make it attachment related. I want to be with you. I long to be close to you. I'm afraid of losing you. I don't like it when there's distance between us, right? It's that relational context. Because usually at the heart of all of our disconnection, there's some sort of relational context. I'm not good enough for you, or at least I'm afraid that I'm not. I'm not doing it right for you. And that's so hard for me because you are the most important person in the world. We keep just bringing back our fears to like the we, the us, the you. And what that does is it puts her on your team. It doesn't have to be crazy deep. It can just think about, well, goodness, you love this person? Tell them in different ways and relate it to what you need and what you fear.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for taking that process down for us a bit so that it's a little bit simpler to understand and we can get started. My follow-up question to that is, if people don't engage in self-reflection, self-work before they enter into a marriage commitment, do you feel like people can end up marrying the wrong people for them once they start to do the work? Like, have you ever found that they discover that maybe because of their primary attachment, like you mentioned earlier, wasn't the most secure and they ended up marrying based on their attachment wounds?
Yeah. I think it can happen. I think it's more rare than common for it to happen. I think you can be with somebody that's not good for you. Like if your partner is just generally willing not to make any changes, and if you're not willing to make any changes about like how you see the world or like maybe adopting their core values, then you might be at a stalemate. It might not be going anywhere. But generally, I feel like people can do a lot of this work if both are willing. And for some, it's going to be harder. For some, it is going to be harder. But I think the willingness, the tenderness, the softness, the willingness to go there together really enhances your chances of being there. And honestly, maybe this is part of my bias too, but when I'm in therapy with my couples, my role isn't to, if they want to work on the relationship and they want it to be successful, my role isn't to sit there and like not have hope and tell them like why it's not going to work. Like I see how it will work and I help guide them to that. If they're there because they're like, I'm not sure if it works and I want to discern whether I want to be here or not, that's a whole nother branch of therapy. It's called discernment counseling. We try to figure out, okay, are we in a good spot or not? Is this worth the price? And I think that's another question is like, is it worth the price? Like the price might be really, really great. And for that relationship, for you, it might not be worth it. I think
that's an amazing question because we pay a price for everything that we're trying to get in life, right?
Yeah.
And if you want a happy, healthy, loving relationship, no matter what, with anyone, you're going to have to do some work. So you have to decide if we put in all this work, is the person I'm with, and if I'm the person who I am, if we're able to work on this, is it a relationship that aligns for both of us and supports our needs and our wants and our desires? Yeah. Because you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to pay that price no matter what for a healthy relationship, right?
Right. Yeah. And some people may have some intuition going into a relationship that there are, attachment related fears that are like really big or some trauma from childhood. And you may know that your partner's got that or you got that. And I think it's important to recognize that and go, okay, this is going to be a lot harder because of this stuff. Like it's going to be harder. That's okay. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. Sometimes harder means that we get closer pretty dang fast because we figure out how to heal through all of this stuff. And that's really amazing or really bonding. But asking yourself, okay, as if a guy's listening that's like in that dating position, as I'm dating people looking for that person who is showing up a bit more secure right off the bat, that's going to put you in a I guess a better position. You've kind of got the deck stacked for you in that sense. And weighing that, saying, am I willing to go into those really more challenging places? Do I think I can do that? If not, I'd like to start with a much more secure place. My own personal history, I had done a bit more insecurity in certain relationships. I didn't actually know about all this stuff. So I just kind of was like, boop, I'm in there. But after being in that, getting out of a relationship like that, going like, oh, dude, I want to start from a strong position. That is what I want. I want to show up really strong, and I want to attract people who are in that really strong position. That's where I want to be.
It's amazing. And so now I want to make a new shift in the conversation, because your entire social media account is about couples and relationships, but also a lot about what you do to show love for your wife.
Yeah.
How did you know that your wife was the one?
Oh my goodness. This is so funny. And it's going to be like the cheesiest thing in the world. I had been like on so many like dates and, explored a lot of that. And I was hopeful. I guess I'm giving a little bit of backstory that kind of relates to your question, but kind of not. I'll give some context to this though. But I remember previously, I think I used to show up in relationships a bit more insecure, maybe like really like fearful of like wanting to find somebody, right? Like thinking about it like day one, like, oh, I want to lock them down and all this kind of or just wanting something, right? And I think it came out of like
secure the bag on the first date.
No,
lock
but
them down. You
right?
do live in Utah.
Right. And we tend to do that. Yeah. Well, no, it's not really a stereotype. It's kind of true.
Are you Mormon?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, well,
it's not a stereotype. It's kind of true. He said.
Yeah. Mind you, we don't really use the name Mormon. We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Oh,
and
sorry.
I no, that's not offensive at all. I just make the distinction because it's just something that I think is, I don't know, important. The center of our faith is Jesus Christ. And so that's really important there. But yeah, in our culture, most people get married like pretty young because there is an emphasis on families, a lot of value around that. And I was 30 when I got married, which here is like, that's old, man. And so
I was gonna say, you're late to the game, man.
Seriously, she had to wheel me out of the retirement home to.
Oh my God.
Well, and in that, I remember I used to feel like really anxious about like wanting to find somebody. And I guess this is, for me, part of healing insecurity, and the journey is going to look different for everybody. But for me, part of insecurity kind of overlaps with what we're talking about, which was faith. Kind of getting that place where I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna trust. I'm just gonna trust God that like he's gonna just like take care of me. Like I'm good. I'm just gonna show up my best self and just kind of wait it out and be good. And it's so funny. When I became less anxious, I remember like I went on this date with my wife, and she exuded so many like just wonderful qualities, just seemed so kind, so secure in herself, honestly. And I had like a pretty good heightened sense of like insecurity because of previous experiences with people that I had dated. And I think I was in the best position possible because I was trusting, I was calm, I was secure. And she was in a really good position where I could sense like right off the bat that she was in that same boat, and I knew what to look for. And this is really funny. This is where it gets really weird. I do video journaling sometimes where I'll just like pop over my phone and just talk to it. So I don't really have a ton of time to write it down. And I don't know, it's kind of fun to like look back and be like, whoa, I get to see myself and like the emotion and everything. Anyway, I did this video journal sitting in my car that night, and I was like, and I'd never done this before, but I was like, dang, that day was awesome. Like she was so kind, so warm. She seemed so like sure of herself. And I even said, I was like, I don't know who I'm going to marry, but I really hope that it's like this girl, if not her, because I just all the things that I experienced. And it's so funny. I even went as far as to say, I was like, I'm never going to show anybody this because it's so embarrassing, but maybe one day, and I even paused. You can see me like pause in the video. I'm like, maybe one day I would marry her. And I'm like, I guess if you're watching this, it means we're getting married. And I like ended the video, and I then took that video and I held it. I didn't show her until the day I proposed to her. And I put like a compilation of videos of us since that day. And like I gave her some headphones, gave her a phone, and I had her like watch the video, and then it was like followed up with all these like clips of us, and then I came up like, will you marry me on the screen? And it's funny, she had no idea. And then I filmed like the whole experience, so it's actually on my Instagram. But yeah, for me, it's kind of hard. It's part of it was tangible, part of it was intangible. There was still a process of like dating and figuring all that out and whatnot. But yeah, I think the more sure of yourself that you are, the more it's easy to recognize surety, security, and just like the people who are like you. You just kind of like, oh yeah, I got you. Like you start locking in and you can find them a lot easier.
Love that. Love how you became like a law of attraction magnet because you just said, I'm not going to worry about it. But you also said something very powerful, which is the second I stopped being less anxious, right? Once you stopped bringing anxiety to the table, anxiety stopped showing up to the table. And you were
For sure.
able to be served with security, which is what you were projecting. And that's how you found a good match that you found would be good for a lifetime, because security is going to bring with you like the problem solving, because relationships, no matter how much you love that person, you're still going to have issues that crop up, stressful things that crop up from kids and bills and like disasters that come up. So you need to be sure and secure that your partner is going to be able to weather those storms with you. So that is like so cool that you pointed that out. And I know that we are drawing to the end of the time here. I could talk to you all day and ask you all these questions because I love the knowledge you're spitting out. But I would love to know some positive things that couples can do to spice up their love life or their just connection with each other. If you could give some bullet points for anyone listening.
Yeah, as far as spice goes, my goodness, like have fun. Like I know it sounds so simple, but like I think we get most of these conversations that I have are really based in a lot of what we're talking about, like attachment and like vulnerability and connection. And that's so important, especially in the face of conflict or really in the prevention of conflict, staying emotionally close. But emotional closeness, that's like emotional intimacy. That's one version of intimacy. There's sexual intimacy. There's, intellectual intimacy. You're sharing like podcasts together. You're reading books together, or like, I don't know, stuff that you're learning. You're exploring the world mentally. But I think fun is so underrated. It is incredibly important. That actually was one of the number one attractors. Speaking of that first date, just the energy of like, dang, she's so fun. And if you're like, oh, but we're not fun, well, be fun. Like, go do something fun. There are so many things. I do date night ideas on my Instagram all the time, and a lot of them are very simple. Go watch one and do it like right now, because
what if they don't have anything in common? Because I get this question a lot. Like, what I get a complaint that like we don't have things in common. Like I like to go ski and do activities and all this stuff, and they like to stay at home. They don't want to socialize with friends. Like what happens if they've gotten together in a marriage where their compatibility in that sense is just they can't seem to find common ground?
Gotcha. I think this is where core values is really important. You start exploring why you do the things you do and find ways that they match. Like, why do you want to stay home? And why do you want to go out? Are there values that are deeper in that sense? And you can do this. You can find things that maybe kind of help match. Like, oh yeah, we're doing the same thing, like for the same purpose. Or it increases your empathy and understanding of the other person. I always tell people, don't do things you don't agree with in your relationship, because you wind up resentful, and in the long run, it just doesn't work. But you can still do those same exact things with a preface of deep emotional like understanding and empathy behind why it's important to them. Like if you understand like more clearly why your wife likes to stay home, like then you're going to be more excited to stay home and do something within that sphere. And if she understands more deeply like why you like to do something, she might be more motivated to show up for you, because my goodness, you love each other. You want to be there for each other. So understanding like the core values and the motivation behind why I do what I do and why you do what you do, finding things that match it, and then being willing to be flexible. Like, oh yeah, I could show up for you in that way. I see that as an opportunity, not as a burden. I'm stoked to show up for you like this.
Love that. Those are some really great pointers for people to connect. That was so good. My next and like one of my last questions along the lines of fun, do you believe that you should marry your best friend, or is that kind of like a myth? Do they need to be your best friend, or does that matter?
I don't know. That's a funny thing. It's like, what's the definition of a best friend, I guess, is like what comes to my mind. And is a best friend a prerequisite, or is it something that you develop and create? Like, can you create that? And is their role to be your best friend? I don't know. I think it depends on the relationship. Like,
what is a spouse's perfect role?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm like cool enough to say like this is it for like the world, right? Like I think it kind of depends on the person and the context, and also cultural context. Like spousal roles are very different across the globe and how that works, right? To say like, I know what's right, I really hesitate to do that on this one, just because I'll tell you, like in my relationship, my wife in a lot of ways is my best friend. I kind of choose that though, right? Does she like everything I like? No, for sure not. She didn't grow up skiing and mountain biking and hiking and camping and doing all the stuff that I love to do. And I love that stuff. She loves being inside and cozy. Honestly, we're talking about my relationship in a lot of ways. And that's okay. Like I choose to intentionally see like, oh, how is this person my best friend? Because I'm gonna hang out with them more than anybody in the whole wide world. So how am I gonna make that work? Because I love her. I love her personality. I love who she is. Those things are kind of auxiliary. I can't even say that word. They're appendages. There we go. They're appendages to something that's deeper. And so if I love that which is deeper, then yeah, I can get in on, the things she likes to do. And she's willing to be kind of flexible and try to get into what I like. And in that sense, yeah, we're best friends. Are there, guys who are traditionally my best friend who I've grown up skiing with and stuff? Yeah, that's a different kind of best friend. I think it's, I don't know. I think it's a kind of a flexible term and one that you can, in a lot of ways, create if you so choose.
Love that. Love that. And I love how we were talking inadvertently about your relationship because it's also a perfect example about how it can be successful and how, so anybody who's struggling with that, I'm going to put Trevor's links down below. You can go to his page because he has so many tips on how to create connection with a partner. And, so that's awesome. And as a last question, I would like to ask you, for anyone who's kind of just starting this journey, and I would like to speak to men in particular, what would you give as a bit of advice for them to get started on their maybe healing journey as a man? And I know we already talked about within couple, but what about within self?
Oh, that's hard just because it's so big. Maybe I'll relate it to the idea of couples because there is an individual element a huge individual element that shows up to that party, right? And I think a big way to start healing yourself in that is just start being really honest with yourself. Start being honest about what are my insecurities? I'm not ready to tell anybody. That's fine. Just write them down, right? Put them in a note on your phone or write them on a piece of paper and throw it in the garbage or burn it after. I don't care. Just kind of make it go from the inside to the outside. What are my insecurities? What are my fears? What are the things that I really long for? What do I really hope for? Be willing to go to an emotional place with yourself and be kind to yourself. I think that's kind of a next layer. And if you have a hard time being kind to yourself, try being kind to maybe a past version of yourself. And the reason I say this is because a lot of times our insecurities, our fears and all that is rooted in memory, in trauma or just experiences, whether they qualify as trauma or not. And those experiences shape a lot of, like I said, those insecurities. And maybe you can envision that 5-year-old self, that 10-year-old self, the 14-year-old self, that one who was embarrassed, the one who felt rejected, the one who was afraid of something, the one who was watching a divorce or, one parent cheating on another and they didn't know what to do with their feelings. Imagine that guy. And what would you say to him? You pick him up. Man, you'd give him a hug. You'd take care of him. You'd be that older, wiser, almost like a parent figure to step in. And I think doing a lot of that, just imagining if I can't feel good about me right now, where along my timeline can I feel good about him? And can I give him some love? Can I give him some care in a time of need? And I think that's a powerful, really powerful exercise. So in summary, love your past self. Start digging and asking yourself real honest questions about fears and longings. If I could put them into 2 categories, learn about your fears, learn about your longings.
Absolutely agree. So powerful. This has been a transformational podcast. You've given us so many tidbits, so many scientific facts to rely on and relate to, look back on and deeply research into, and tips for couples to come together. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, Trevor. I'm going to add all of his links below in the show notes, guys. Please check out his page, get his course for couples, and we'll talk to you next time, guys.
Hey, thank you.